Okay, picture this. James Dean, young, hungry for attention, and decides the best way to get it is to, well, lie in a coffin as a publicity stunt. I'm not sure that would have been my first thought. Welcome to the Mad Genius Thesis. I'm your host, and with me is, well, our expert, ready to, well, dive deep into the life of James Dean.
Yeah.
We're going to try to answer a pretty big question today. Was he just a troubled rebel? Or could we actually, call him a mad genius?
You know, that coffin incident, it really does make you stop and think. It's definitely a strong image, and it's just one of many, many really interesting stories that Donald Spoto shares in his biography, Rebel, The Life and Legend of James Dean. It really does set the stage for us, a life that was lived on the edge, pushing boundaries, challenging what everyone thought was normal.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does make you wonder if that drive, that drive to be different, to be shocking, was it all an act, or was there something more to it?
I mean, yeah, that's the question, right? And to try to get at an answer, I think we need to look past the image. The one everyone knows, the one that was kind of created for him. We need to really get into the details of his life. For instance, his childhood wasn't the picture perfect upbringing you'd expect for, a Hollywood star.
Right, right. When you read Spoto's book, he describes a childhood, well, it was full of poverty and instability. He was born in Indiana during the Depression. Yeah, his family life wasn't great.
Exactly. And there's this one moment, a turning point. I think it really left a mark on him. His mom, Mildred, she died when he was only 9.
Wow. Yeah. That's I mean, for anyone, that's
Yeah.
huge. But for a 9-year-old, yeah, it was no wonder. I mean, Spoto talks about Dean being, really lonely, needing people to like him, and just scared of being rejected.
Yeah.
It's almost like he carried all that fear with him.
And, you can really see how that played out in his relationships later on. I mean, with men and women, you can see this back and forth. He wanted to be close to people, but at the same time, he couldn't really let anyone in.
Yeah, that's interesting. But even early on, when he was younger, you see those hints of the rebel, like the James Dean. Everyone knows Spoto mentions Dean being a prankster, always trying to get attention, but it was always on his terms. It's like he was testing the limits, pushing to see how far he could go.
Right. It's that classic rebel, he fought with his teachers, didn't want to follow the rules, and it always seemed like he was looking for some way to get all that energy out, all those emotions. Spoto even talks about this time with his drama teacher, Adeline Brookshire, I think her name was. She saw his talent, she knew he was good, but she was so frustrated with him because he was always so defiant.
It sounds like he was really torn between, fitting in and breaking free. Like it was this constant battle. And maybe that's what fueled him.
Yeah.
As a person and as an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And we see that in his acting too. Dean, he was really into method acting. He was inspired by guys like Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. They were known for being intense and for really getting into their roles emotionally. And Dean, he went to some pretty big lengths to get into character. Like he actually lived as a paraplegic for a whole month just to prepare for a part in a play.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's intense. I mean, do you think that was, healthy for someone like Dean, someone who was already so emotional? Could that kind of blur the lines between what's real and what's just acting?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there is a line, between really committing to your art and losing yourself in it. And for someone like Dean, with all his emotional stuff, it's hard to say. Remember what Spoto said about Dean's performance? I think it was called A Madman's Manuscript.
Oh yeah, the one where he almost attacked another student while they were performing.
Right. And it makes you think, was that all part of the act, or is it a sign of something darker inside him?
And then there's the whole thing with his sexuality. I mean, it was the 50s. It wasn't exactly, a time where you could be open about that kind of thing. Spoto talks about his relationship with Rogers Brackett, this radio director who became his mentor and his lover.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that relationship is the power dynamic. I mean, Dean, he was so desperate for someone to guide him, to accept him. And it's possible that he felt pressured, to go along with Brackett's advances. It's just another layer of his struggle with who he was and that fear of being rejected.
And you can see that fear of rejection. It's there in his relationships with women too. They're always so intense, so passionate, but they never last. It's almost like he sabotaged them before they could hurt him.
Yeah, it's definitely a pattern. It comes up again and again in Spoto's book. He falls for someone hard, but then just as quickly he pulls away. And he ends up leaving a lot of broken hearts behind.
Yeah, it's like he just couldn't break out of that.
Yeah.
Needing people, but being afraid of them at the same time.
Yeah.
And then you add fame on top of all that. Things get really, really messy.
Yeah, and that's really where I think the whole mad genius idea starts to make sense. You know, Dean finally gets his big break with East of Eden, and he becomes this huge star practically overnight. And all of a sudden he's living this life that he always seemed to want. But if you read Spoto, it wasn't, it wasn't all perfect, was it?
No, it seems like the fame, all that attention, it just made his insecurities and anxieties even worse. He starts,
Yeah.
acting out, pushing people away, almost like he's trying to ruin his own success.
It's like, be careful what you wish for. He gets thrust into the spotlight, and instead of enjoying it, he pulls back. He starts being reckless, outbursts in public, driving like a maniac, even like going out of his way to make the studio executives mad.
But wouldn't you think that someone who, you know, pulls a stunt like that coffin thing, wouldn't you think they'd love the attention? It just seems so contradictory, doesn't it?
Right, and that's what makes him so interesting to study. It's like he needed that validation. He needed people to see him, but then the moment he got it, he couldn't handle it. Like he was addicted to the chase, but terrified of actually winning. I mean, some people might say, that could be a sign of a deeper problem,
Yeah.
psychologically, maybe even like a personality disorder or something.
So you're saying like his self-destructive behavior, it was like a way of self-sabotage.
It's possible, yeah. Maybe he was, I don't know, maybe subconsciously he was trying to control things, create some kind of chaos he could understand because all that pressure, the fame, was just too much.
Or maybe he was just trying to live up to this rebel image,
Yeah.
the one he created for himself.
Right. That's another layer to think about. The James Dean everyone saw, the broody rebel. Maybe that became like a trap for him. Like he was always playing a part, even when he wasn't acting. And it makes it really hard to know who the real James Dean was.
And that makes me think about his acting, the method acting, the way he completely threw himself into his roles. Do you think maybe that was his way of escaping all that pressure, of taking all those crazy emotions and putting them into something productive?
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, maybe acting gave him a safe space to explore those emotions, the anger,
Yeah.
the vulnerability, all of it, in a way he couldn't in his real life.
So his art was both like his savior and his downfall.
Maybe, yeah. The same intensity that made him such a magnetic actor, maybe that also fueled all his self-destructive behavior.
And then there's Giant, his last film. Spoto talks about the tension on set, especially between Dean and Rock Hudson.
Yeah, the rumors about, them being attracted to each other, especially back then, it was a different time. It just adds another layer of complexity to everything. Dean, he was drawn to these strong, powerful guys, but there was always this competition, this jealousy.
It's like he was constantly testing himself, pushing himself to the limit in his life, in his career, in everything.
And tragically, that need to push things, it extended to his driving, too. Spoto writes about how Dean bought that Porsche Spider, just a few days before the crash that killed him.
It's almost like a Greek tragedy, isn't it? This young guy obsessed with speed, living life on the edge, and then he dies in this fiery crash right at the height of his fame.
It's hard not to see it as, kind of inevitable in a way. He seemed to be drawn to death, but also kind of scared of it at the same time. Like he knew it was coming for him.
And that feeling of doom, that fatalistic way of thinking, it makes you wonder if his mad genius was tied to his death somehow, like they were inseparable.
It's a question people are still asking.
Yeah.
Would he have, become a better actor if he had lived longer? Or was all that intensity, that rawness, was that part of what was destroying him?
I guess we'll never know. But what he did, in such a short time, it had a huge impact on movies, on culture, on everything. Yeah, it's like his life itself became like a piece of art, tragic and beautiful,
Yeah.
but unfinished.
And maybe that's part of why we're still so fascinated by him. His story, it touches on those deep fears we all have, but also our desires, that need to be free, to be ourselves, that struggle against fitting in, and that, the pull of living life on the edge.
Right. It's like he tapped into something that everyone can relate to, that feeling of being restless, of wanting to rebel. And it resonated with people back then, and it still does, today.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can see his influence everywhere. Music, fashion, movies, books, everything. He became this symbol of teenage angst, this icon who represented everything that generation was feeling.
And Spoto, he even goes beyond just, teenage rebellion. He compares him to like those classic Western heroes,
Yeah.
the cowboys, the loners who live by their own rules.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. I mean, Dean definitely had that lone wolf vibe.
Yeah.
The rebel who doesn't back down from anyone, who fights for what he believes in, even if it means being alone.
Right. But Dean, he wasn't, a cowboy in the Wild West. He lived in a much more complicated world. After the war, there was this sense of disillusionment, uncertainty. And Dean, it was like he was the perfect embodiment of that.
Right. He was like the cowboy for a new generation, trying to figure out who they were, dealing with the pressure to conform, wanting to rebel, and the world was changing so fast all around them.
And we can't forget about Hollywood, right? They played a big part in creating the whole James Dean myth. They knew they had something special, someone who could really connect with young people, people who wanted something real, something raw.
Oh, yeah. The studio system. They knew how to create stars. They knew how to tell stories. And they definitely helped build up Dean's image as this ultimate rebel, the tragic hero.
Right. They used his looks, his broodiness, his everything to create this image of teen angst and rebellion.
And Dean, whether he meant to or not, he went along with it. He cultivated this aura of mystery and danger on screen and off, and it just made him even more of a legend.
It's like he became this blank slate that people could project their own, dreams and frustrations onto.
Yeah. He was the anti-hero, the bad boy with a sensitive side. And it was a combination that, people just couldn't resist.
And even though, his life was cut short, his impact on our culture, it's undeniable. You could still see him, in every rock star with a brooding look, every rebel in a leather jacket, every movie that celebrates, young people fighting against the rules.
And that just shows you how universal those themes are, the ones he explored in his work. Figuring out who you are, wanting to be accepted, longing for connection. Those are things we all experience, no matter what generation you're from.
So it's like Dean's legacy. It goes beyond his movies. Beyond his short life, he became this cultural symbol of that constant struggle between fitting in and breaking free, between wanting to belong and needing to be different.
He reminds us that even when we're feeling lost, even when we're rebelling, we're not alone in it.
And maybe that's the key to why he's still so important to us, James Dean, this troubled guy who didn't really want to be a star. He still captures our imagination because he represents something really deep about being human, to need to be real, to connect with others, to find something more.
We all have a little bit of James Dean in us, that desire to break free, to question everything, to find our own voice.
Yeah. And even though his story is a sad one, it reminds us how fragile life is.
Yeah.
And how fame can be dangerous. But it also inspires us, to be ourselves, to challenge the rules, to live life on our own terms.
That's a great way to put it. And I guess that's where we'll wrap up our deep dive into the life and legacy of James Dean. Thanks for listening to the Mad Genius Thesis.
And until next time, keep exploring those fascinating and sometimes crazy connections between creativity and the human mind.